Welcome to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credence. It may come as a surprise to many parents, but 1/3 of all high school students across the country report that there has been violence in their dating relationships or those of their friends. And I said it's probably a surprise to many parents because about 81% of them don't believe it's a serious issue, and more than half have not spoken with their child about it. So this hour, we do explore the nature of dating violence, and 4 guests join us. Eli Karam is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's an assistant professor in the family therapy program at the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. He also maintains a private practice at the Louisville Individual, Couple, Marital, and Family Therapy Center and is president-elect for the Kentucky Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. And hello again, Eli Karam. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's nice to be back.
Also with U of L's Kent School is Becky Antle. She is associate professor and university scholar and principal investigator of Federal Healthy Relationships Grant for at-risk adults and youth. And Becky Antle, welcome to you. Hello.
Thank you.
Amanda Haupt is community educator and trainer with the Center for Women and Families and has presented hundreds of programs on domestic and sexual violence. She develops, implements, and trains others on primary prevention of personal violence. And Amanda Haupt, hello to you.
Hi.
Bill Stanczykiewicz is president and CEO of the Indiana Youth Institute, an Indianapolis-based research and advocacy group. He's been with the Institute since 1998 after a 15-year career in public policy and the media. Bill Stanczykiewicz, welcome back to the show. Hello.
Always great to be with our friends at WFPL in the Kentuckiana region that we are so glad to serve.
Well, nice to have you back on the program, Bill. And the number to join our conversation is 814-TALK. That's 814-8255. Or toll-free, 877-814-TALK. You can also send an email to soa@wfpl.org. Reach us on Twitter at SOA Talk or on Facebook. Well, you know, I was surprised, too. I talk about parents, but I was surprised at how many teenagers in that survey reported that they experienced violence either in their relationships or they knew of it happening in their friends' relationships. And I cited the other statistics about 80% of parents don't think it's a serious issue. I mean, why would that be so? Why would it, on the one hand, appear to be very, prevalent, at least 1/3 of the high school students, and yet parents are unaware of that? Bill, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the bigger picture of the times that a lot of parents have just in challenge and communicating with their teenagers about anything. My good friend Walt Mueller from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding likes to quip that, at about 13, 14 years old, this gap develops in a teenager's head between their ear and their brain that doesn't close until the person becomes a young adult. So many parents struggle talking with their kids about whether it be sexual behavior, whether it be about substance abuse, whether it be how you doing in school or who are your friends. And I think this is just consistent with that so often parents struggle communicating with their kids about just about anything. And then it's kind of this, it feeds itself, that if the kids don't talk to the parents about it and the parents don't ask about it, then the parents aren't going to think it's a problem because they're not hearing about it. It's just another example of why we need to do our best. And I'm the parent of a teenager. We need to do our best to be communicating with our kids, even if they're giving us those 2- and 3-word answers at times.
Well, and along with that, and you've touched on it, but maybe in a layered way, it's, when you talk about parents trying to talk to their kids about anything and, about the friends or who they're hanging out with, when you add romance or, a love relationship to that, a lot of kids have the ooh factor. They don't want to talk to their parents about things like that. And maybe parents feel like, well, I don't want to make them uncomfortable by talking too much about sex or what they're doing or, Becky Antle, what else is feeding into this unawareness?
Well, I do agree that a lot of this has to do with just parents not being comfortable having these conversations with their teens in general. And so it needs to start much younger. It's a conversation that needs to begin, in the latency age and continue on. And you're really, like you said, it's a layered approach. And what we're finding is that parents aren't having conversations with their kids about relationships at all. And not just about relationship violence, but about what is a healthy relationship. And so we get these kids into our healthy relationships classes and we ask them, how many of you have ever talked with your parents about what healthy communication or conflict resolution looks like or what a good dating partner would look like? And none of them raised their hands. We're just not, like Bill said, comfortable having these conversations, and particularly when we wait till that very awkward adolescent age. And so if we can start younger, and if we can approach it from a health perspective and not just from a pathology perspective where we're really worried about violence and sex and those kinds of issues, but if we can begin to build a foundation of this is a healthy relationship, these are the ingredients to that, this is how you communicate and resolve conflicts in a healthy way, then we're laying a foundation that will help prevent those problems down the road, and something we can come back to if we start to see some of those warning signs for dating violence and other issues popping up with our kids.
That's a really good point, because so often the interaction between parents and teens are, don't do this, don't do that, be careful of that, I'm warning you about this. It's all dangers around every corner. And I don't know, and we know teens sometimes have a streak, too, of wanting to push that envelope, and I'm going to live a little dangerously, or I'm going to do this because my mom's worried that I will. We know how teenagers can be, too. We were all there at one point ourselves. Amanda Haupt, what's your sort of big picture take on this?
I mean, in terms of parents and kids, I think that parents come into things really well equipped and talking about things like drugs and alcohol and what to do in those situations. But I think it's a really different subject when you get to negotiating sexual boundaries and you get into negotiating dynamics in a relationship. I don't know that there's a script out there that's as reliable as the scripts we have for other things. And so some of it, I think, is just parents needing to practice kind of talking about this and really kind of get to a comfort point where they can create an open door where their kids are willing to talk to them too. And I think that absolutely as early as possible is essential, really.
For just that trust and the two-way communication. And Eli, Karam, I want to turn to you also now. Are parents generally like totally unaware that there's something amiss, or do they often have a notion that something just isn't right, but they don't know why, or they haven't been able to get the answers they need?
Well, I think there are a subsection of parents that almost idealize their son or daughter. There are no red flags at school. They enjoy their friends. They know about what's going on. And this is relationship violence, teen dating violence, is not something they think to ask about. So I think it flies under the radar as far as, this couldn't be happening to my son or daughter. Or certainly if the child is not talking, the teenager is not talking about their dating relationship, parents tend to give the privacy needed as long as they know the specifics. But your second question, as far as why this, could happen, I believe it's also a gap probably in parents, as Becky and Amanda and Bill have said, of knowing how to talk. And I believe it's a conversation that should start early and shouldn't be based around when there's a problem or when something has happened. It can start out of health and prevention versus waiting till there is an incident or they've been alerted from some other place.
I think a couple of other things that add to the complexity of this particular issue is that the warning signs for teen dating violence are very similar to the warning signs for other kinds of problems like substance abuse, so things like withdrawal and depression and anxiety and school problems and those kinds of things. And so it's really hard to identify, what is the source of these symptoms that my child is exhibiting and getting to the root of that. So that's one issue. And I think another issue, when we're talking about having these conversations with our children, one of the things that complicates that with this particular issue when we're talking about healthy relationships is that parents themselves may not feel like they're the expert on healthy relationships. Mm-hmm. We know our divorce rate is between 40 and 60%, depending on which statistic you used. And I think that, this is an education that we necessarily received formally of this is a healthy relationship. And so it really adds to that feeling of, do I really have adequate information? Am I really setting the example here in the home? And yet we know that those examples are critical for children for the formation of those skills. No, absolutely. And Bill, chime in here too on the modeling that kids get in the home. I mean, can work for good or bad. The messages that children get about gender roles or what is considered normal or healthy, we can say.
What's interesting, for parents who feel I'm just not getting through to my teenager, I just don't communicate well with my teenager. When the parents aren't around but the researchers are, the teenagers, regardless of the survey, regardless of the topic, will always say the number one influence on my life are my parents or my parent, whether it be what they tell me or what I observe. That's true about substance abuse. That's true about expectations around sexual behavior. It's true about financial literacy and how, as a teenager, I'm going to handle my money. So you might not think you're getting through, but very likely you are, which is why you need to have confidence. You need to be emboldened to have these conversations, send these signals to your teenagers, even if you think they're not paying attention because they're not explicitly responding. They really are. And, of course, the most important message that you can send is by modeling the healthy behavior in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I want to look at violence, too, because we know it can take many forms, emotional, physical, sexual. Is there a more common form of teen dating violence more so than others? Does it tend to be more physical or sexual, or is it more emotional? Do we know, Amanda?
When we look at the issue of teen dating violence, it's really not unlike looking at domestic violence. You're dealing with within an intimate partnership, one person using sort of a pattern of behaviors to gain and maintain power and control. And those patterns of behaviors, those behaviors might look really different. So something that's very, very common at the teenage level, as with the adult level, is emotional abuse. So saying things that might hurt that person or tear down their self-esteem. Something else that I think happens a lot among teens is really one person trying to deny their partner access to friends and support networks, so really trying to isolate their partner. I think what complicates that is that very often jealousy is one of the earliest warning signs to crop up in a situation. And for teenagers, often jealousy is very confusing. I think that it can be mistaken in a lot of cases for love, because the way that it's introduced is that one person is saying, I just care about you so much I can't stand to be away from you. I just want to be with you all the time. I want us to have more time to spend together. And if you're a teen, even if you're an adult, that can seem incredibly flattering. Mm-hmm. But then when that person sort of makes good on that jealousy piece and really does want to be with you all the time and is making an effort to know where you are and to talk to your friends and kind of keep tabs on you, it takes on a whole different tone. So I would say jealousy is a very common thing.
I'd have to agree with Amanda. I see so many teenagers and families in my practice where the teenagers kind of lost balance before they were involved with a lot of after-school activities. They had a good group of friends, and this relationship, which starts out as this kind of intense, joined at the hip feeling, it takes over everything, and they lose balance, which could be an indicator to a lot of parents that something is going on with their son or daughter. And it's often the jealousy, or he only gets angry at me because he cares so much. He wants to spend all his time with me, and that can be confusing for teenagers, especially teenagers that have never had an intimate relationship before, which also happens that many times this could be the person's first intense relationship. So it takes on even a larger meaning in the kind of developmental course of a teenager.
I was going to say, what teenagers are going through at this time of their life, just any teenager, it's those kinds of things, Eli, you're saying can make them, more vulnerable to falling into these traps and to, as you said, it's their first experience. Well, maybe this is what love is.
Right. This is what love is. And as we said earlier, if you don't have a blueprint for what a healthy relationship is, or your parent isn't talking to you, you don't have a good model, it's easy to fall into these traps.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that we look at the University of Louisville as it relates to types of dating violence among teens is related to what's been called intimate terrorism versus situational violence. Intimate terrorism is the kind of violence that is very much about power and control dynamics, and that is sort of our stereotypical view of domestic violence or dating violence that we would see portrayed in movies and videos and things like that. But what we're finding is that what's actually much more common among community samples and particularly among youth samples is what's called situational violence. And situational violence, instead of being those same power and control dynamics where you have one person who's the single perpetrator who's seeking to gain power over every aspect of the other person's life, is the situational violence that has much more to do with poor communication and conflict resolution skills, where teens will get into some kind of an argument or a conflict and things escalate. And because they don't have appropriate communication skills, they resort to physical tactics or other kinds of abusive tactics. And so that's why programs like some of those that we've talked about or will talk about that teach better communication and conflict resolution skills are critical. That also may be why there's that discrepancy between what teens are reporting and what adults are reporting, because the type of dating violence that teens are experiencing is not the stereotypical power and control male-perpetrated kind of model that has been used for domestic violence. That's not what teens experience. And we have a lot of statistics that show that this other type, this situational violence, is much more common.
And before we go to break, because I want to come back to that point when we talk about teens recognizing abuse when they see it or experiencing it,
Right.
And sort of the disconnect there. Bill, but quickly before we go to break, you also wrote something recently. You talked about other forms of abuse, emotional. You also mentioned economic abuse. I had never heard that phrase before. What does that mean? Bill?
Economic abuse?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to the break and we were going to speak about it
I'm
afterwards.
sorry. No, we have a minute or two here.
Okay, well, it's basically two things. Theft, stealing money from people, but also in relation to this controlling behavior, it's denying somebody a chance to get a job and saying, you don't want a job, there's going to be less time you're going to be able to spend with me, or you're going to be meeting other people, or, it fits into this pattern of what our other guests have spoken about here, that there are just many ways to try to exert control. It could be physical, it could be sexual, it could be emotional, but it also can be economic. Taking money, playing games with people in a controlling way related to their finances, or just really putting pressure on that boyfriend or girlfriend not to get a job because, hey, you're going to spend less time with me, and I don't want that to happen, so don't take that job so we can be together. It is another form. It's categorized as another form of violence within a teen dating relationship.
Amanda.
At the center, it's a really common thing that we see economic or financial abuse. It's so prevalent that we actually have an economic success program that addresses that issue. And the whole goal of that program really is to help people regain control of their kind of financial and economic future. I think for some of our younger clients, too, their experience of that, because often they're not in the workforce, is a partner who's really trying to jeopardize anything that they do to kind of promote themselves forward. So maybe if they're participating in something academic or some kind of school program that serves to maybe help them get a scholarship, that person's stopping them from participating in that or trying to thwart that in some way. So just that person's ability to be successful. Just
that whole, I don't want you're getting too good for yourself, or who do you think you are,
Absolutely.
doing that sort of program.
Kind of bringing them down to size.
Right. Let's take a really quick break, and I wonder if you experienced violence of some kind in your dating relationships, in your teen years or college years. Maybe you have teenagers now, you're wondering how to prepare them for dating, the kinds of conversations to be having with them. You can join this conversation and share those experiences, ask your questions. Join us at 814-TALK, 814-8255, toll-free 877-814-TALK. You can email us, soa@wfpl.org, reach us on Twitter at SOA Talk, or on Facebook. You are listening to State of Affairs on WFPL. Welcome back to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credence. We're talking this hour about teen dating violence, exploring the warning signs. We'll be talking about consequences and how parents can talk to their children about this issue. Our guests are Bill Stanczykiewicz. He is president and CEO of the Indiana Youth Institute. Amanda Haupt is community educator and trainer with the Center for Women and Families in Louisville. And from the University of Louisville Kent School of Social Work, Eli Karam, a marriage and family therapist. He is an assistant professor in the family therapy program. And Becky Antle, she is associate professor and university scholar and the principal investigator of a federal Healthy Relationships grant for at-risk adults and youth. And you're welcome to join in at 814-TALK, 814-8255, toll-free 877-814-TALK. I want to talk a little bit about the insidiousness, too, of violence, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, that, if it starts, let's say, with teasing or with insults, sort of, it's just all good-natured fun. As violence progresses, is there a kind of adapting that the victim experiences where it becomes normal and then we go on to the next thing? And then, do you know what I'm saying? Like, because some people say, well, how who would stand for that? But it's conditioned over time. Isn't the victim sort of conditioned over time, Becky?
Yes, definitely. I think that there's a sort of desensitization to the kinds of tactics that are used and to the abusive behaviors over time. And so, like you said, it will start small with insults or comments on the clothing that they're wearing or comments on, their activities, extracurricular activities, their school success. And then that sort of escalates over time to don't wear that outfit and don't be involved in that activity and don't associate with those friends, and I don't want you to spend your time studying. I want you to spend your time with me. And so it's very gradual, and that makes it much more difficult for teens to realize what is happening in the relationship until they're so far in that it's very difficult to get out.
And I think the victim also over time develops these rationalizations of, oh, that's just how they are. They're kind of aggressive towards everybody, or they really care about me. He or she didn't mean it. And I think over time they tell themselves that and buffer them from feedback, even from people they really lean on, i.e. their family or their friends, their support network.
I think a lot of times they develop those They develop those because of the person who's abusing them. Very often, after an abusive incident, one of the first things that an abuser is going to do is to justify that action. I'm really sorry that happened, but if you could have just dressed right, then that wouldn't have been the way that that happened. Or if you could have just done this differently, then that wouldn't have provoked that. So I think some of it is borrowing that language and kind of testing it out on friends and family members to see their reaction. I think, too, the reality when we look at this type of abuse is that relationships don't become, certainly physically abusive, overnight. Abusers are very, very good at waiting until they've established love, trust, and commitment before they start being incredibly abusive. The thing I say to audiences a lot is if you were to go on a first date tonight, say you went out to dinner, you were having a nice time, if in the middle of dinner that person leaned across the table and hit you in the face, would you stay for dessert? No, you wouldn't. I mean, it's almost humorous to say that. Abuse just doesn't happen sort of overnight, so it is a very slow progression, and I think that sometimes being in that relationship, not being on the outside of it, it's hard to recognize just when it turned to something that felt really unhealthy and wrong, if that makes sense.
So that can account for, too, maybe why teens aren't speaking up sooner or speaking up at all. Because either they've been conditioned to believe, well, it is my fault, I provoke them, or I make them angry. I mean, sort of classic signs when we've done any program that looks at partner violence. Some of the same things.
Right, and they often have made a number of sacrifices for that relationship by that point. So they may have given up a group of friends, they may have given up extracurricular activities, they may have become sexually active in that relationship, and so they've made sacrifices and investments in that relationship, and that makes it even more difficult to exit.
Bill Stanczykiewicz, I wonder if we can let's start talking about some consequences here. I mean, obviously, we can understand physical harm and the damage that does. What would you characterize as sort of the immediate impact of dating violence?
Well, and one thing, Julie, before we move on,
Sure.
that maybe we need to bring a little bit more light to here is the increased likelihood that alcohol and drugs can be involved in a teen dating relationship. Not always, not all the time, and not to discount any of the outstanding comments that this panel has brought up related to other reasons and other factors. But there is some data out there that when there is teen dating violence, the likelihood that alcohol or drugs are involved doubles. And in fact, according to U.S. Department of Justice, when there is relationship violence of any kind, the folks who are incarcerated for crimes committed relating to relationship violence, more than half of them were either drunk on alcohol or high on drugs when they committed that crime. So yet another reason, as if parents needed more, yet another reason for parents to be talking to their kids about alcohol and about drugs and staying away from those illegal substances for all sorts of reasons, including that it can increase the likelihood, especially of physical and sexual violence in a teen dating relationship.
Just anecdotally, I've worked with several teenagers and families over the last year where the boyfriend and girlfriend were at a party and alcohol exacerbated the jealous feelings where maybe the boyfriend saw his girlfriend talk to another guy at the party, and later, after they were home or while they were intoxicated, this jealousy led to a physical altercation. So I've seen that a couple of times, and certainly alcohol ups the ante when it comes to what we're talking about today.
Right. And Bill, your point's well taken too, that it's a big risk factor, but parents who think, well, my kid doesn't drink, so they're not at risk for dating violence, need to be aware, too, that, as you said, it can happen without those things.
Well, if you think your kid doesn't drink, then talk to your kids about why you're so glad that they don't drink. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, because they still might be. and that's sort of the thing, is don't check the box and think, my kid doesn't do it, so I'm not going to talk to my kid about it. Now, I don't think my 14-year-old is involved with alcohol, but then if we talk about, I'm glad you're not then. Oh, you're aware of the dangers? Good, I'm glad. I'm just double-checking here as your dad, because I love you, Yes, Dad, I know. So that even if you think the best for your kids, as we all hope that we can, it's still worth having the conversation so that they know what those expectations are. And kids are still going to make bad choices. They still have an opportunity to have that free will and make choices, but we want to try to pour as much good stuff into them as we can as they start making those choices.
Absolutely. What are some, let's do look at consequences. Becky, I'll start with you, sort of the short term, immediate. What can begin happening in this young person's life?
Often we see some signs of anxiety and depression as an immediate consequence, then, that contributes obviously to school problems, school failure, missed days of school, disengagement from school, and so academic problems. Then we see social withdrawal. They may have already isolated themselves from their peer group, but even more so once they start to experience this type of abuse, particularly when it becomes physical, because there's an embarrassment factor and just feelings of shame and isolation and self-blame, which can lead to, like we said, some of those social consequences.
So you're describing symptoms too,
right?
Warning signs,
right? And then we do see a much higher rate of suicide attempts and in this particular subgroup of the youth population. And so when those symptoms go unchecked, those consequences are not addressed, it really can become quite serious. And so that's why, the discussion we opened with, the lack of awareness, the discrepancy between the rates of dating violence that are being reported and parental perceptions of that is so critical, because we do need to be able to identify that as parents and intervene early before the consequences become much more severe.
And what is sort of the, Amanda, do you want to jump in here?
I was just going to say, in terms of warning signs for parents and even friends of teens, I think that some of the things that we see, just to give a few concrete examples, is with that social withdrawal piece, we might see a teenager who was really, really active in some program at school. Maybe they played soccer for all 4 years of high school, suddenly stopping their involvement, maybe not participating on the team as much, maybe not going to practices, maybe quitting the team altogether. So quitting some obligations that they were pretty into. Sometimes, too, we'll see people will see them sort of feeling like they have to check in with their partner before they go somewhere. And I know that this is sort of a tough piece, but obviously if somebody's getting blown up by text messages, or if on their Facebook page or their Twitter account they've got messages from one person over and over again, that can often be a warning sign too. But it's tough. We live in a culture where we're text maniacs and social networking junkies. So I think it can be tough to pick up on those things, but I think that sometimes noticing that your teen or your friend is getting just blown up, they're getting a million text messages and they don't seem to be super excited about those, can be kind of a warning sign to check in.
So social media has created new platforms, as we've seen, for abuse.
It totally has, yeah.
So I want to stay on this, though. Some typical things, the early warning signs. Are there things that a teen might actually say, too? We've already talked about teens perhaps excusing their partner's behavior. Oh, he didn't mean it, or she didn't mean it. And, oh, he was just teasing me. If parents, let's say, would say, well, I don't like the way he talked to you just now. Oh, Mom, don't worry about it, But what about, do teens, Eli, sometimes drop hints without wanting to come out and say something's wrong? Are there things that teens will say that are sort of asking for help?
I think they do. Teens that devalue their own self-esteem, that don't think they're worthy of a different type of relationship, that say something like, well, I'm lucky to have anybody to show interest in me, so I'll just stay with what I have. And a lot of times they start to believe, what the abuser has fed them as far as the lines of emotional abuse. So I think anytime you hear diminished self-esteem, it's like what Becky was talking about earlier, points to, depression and anxiety and things like that, would be a good cue for parents or teenagers that just in some ways are not excited about going out with their boyfriend or girlfriend. They don't really want to go. They feel obligated, and sometimes parents can pick up on the fact that their son or daughter is not really into the dating activity.
Can we look, too, at, certainly there's the immediate impact and the consequences. And let's say, teens who are fortunate enough to end those unhealthy relationships and move on and move into adulthood. What are some of the long-lasting effects, though, that these troubling, violent relationships in our young life can have throughout our life? Becky?
Well, certainly the patterns that are formed, that's why this stage of development is so critical, because it's really a time for learning relationship skills, communication skills, negotiation skills, etc., relationship decision-making skills. And that is why this is such a critical age to target in terms of prevention programs like those that are offered at the center and those that we're offering through our grant. Because those skills are developed during this age, and they do carry over into adult relationships, and it may manifest as the type of relationships people choose, the type of people they choose to date, the type of skills that they use as they go to resolve their own conflicts in the future, etc. And so often those repeat in the adult relationships.
I think there are, again, a subsection of those teenagers that have these abuse relationships in their teenage years, and they don't get help, so they repeat this pattern in adulthood. But why these programs that we're talking about today are so valuable, because we know if we do get this psychoeducation, these relationship skills, that not only do you know what to look for as far as warning signs, we call them kind of the difference between green marbles and red marbles in this one curriculum you're using, and the goal is to figure out all the positive qualities green and try to maximize those instead of picking out partners that have all of these reds. So if we learn about these things early on, we can pick healthy relationships in adulthood and later in our teen years. And a side effect of our program is we have many adults and teenagers that start the program in an unhealthy relationship with these signs of emotional and physical abuse. And because of the program, we're actually tracking this now, Becky can talk a little bit about it, that they leave the relationship and get help because of being in the program. Again, with their peers, feeling like they're not the only one going through this in the bubble of their relationship. They realize, oh, there's other people out there too, and this is what I need to do to get out.
Well, the bubble of their relationship, what a great phrase. Amanda Haupt, I know at the Center for Women and Families, you deal with the legacy of violence that does sadly often last through one's life.
Absolutely, yeah. We know, just working with clients, and we work with clients not just in the moment of crisis after somebody's experienced abuse, but in really a long-term way. We know that the impact on a person's self-esteem can be crippling after one of these relationships. It becomes very, very hard to feel a sense of self-worth, I think, after someone's worked so hard to take that away from you. I think, too, we see people who are really reticent to enter into new relationships. So, especially if this is happening in teenage years, we know those are formative relationship years. Then as those teens move past that developmental period, they're afraid to initiate new relationships. They maybe don't trust their partner. So I think that a lot of the preventative work that they're talking about is critical, and that's a lot of what we really try to do at the center, is to talk a lot about healthy and positive relationships, and really a lot of the techniques that we use are just to empower youth, to really give them that sense of self-worth and agency back. And
it's you can't just look at the suffering of the individual or the experience of the individual, because Bill Stankiewicz, as the CEO of a statewide organization, you can see if this violence is not stopped or prevented, what kind of citizens and workforce, what kind of community are we creating? Why, people might say, well, this is a tragedy, but how does this affect the society at large?
Well, the concerns are far-reaching, both immediately for a child whose self-esteem is attacked, who can fall into depression, who can become suicidal, who can even commit suicide, tragically, in the worst-case scenario. The other worst-case scenario is we had a story up here in Indianapolis that just sparked a new statewide law that our governor signed about a week ago because a 20-year-old young woman was murdered by her boyfriend. Teen dating violence taking to the absolute worst extreme. And so it certainly has ramifications immediately. It could have a long-term impact, and even for those who, are not tragically killed or do not sadly take their own lives, that depression can last a long time. Again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but one anecdotal story for you. And I was doing another radio interview up here in Indianapolis. A guy called in probably in his early 30s, said he was still carrying the emotional baggage and depression that he experienced as a teenager from a dating relationship. So it can be long-lasting throughout your life beyond these immediate concerns and immediate dangers that teenagers can experience.
Bill, when we come back, I want to learn more about that state law, and we're going to focus then on prevention, on education, and the hand that everyone needs to play in this, not just those directly involved, let's say. But it's time for another quick break. When we come back, again, more on teen dating violence. I'd love for you to join the program with your experiences, maybe how you have talked with your kids. If you want to share that, give us a call, 814-TALK, 814-8255, toll-free 877-814-TALK. You are listening to State of Affairs on WFPL. Welcome back to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credence. Here are some headlines from the WFPL newsroom. Louisville's downtown arena has been named the KFC Yum Center in a $13.5 million deal. Frontier Airlines will announce later today that they will resume nonstop service between Louisville and Denver. And the University of Louisville hosts a group of African-American editorial writers this evening in a forum about the Obama presidency. More on those stories coming up later today on WFPL. Our conversation on teen dating violence continues now. Our guests are two from the University of Louisville Kent School of Social Work. That is Eli Karam, a marriage and family therapist and assistant professor in the family therapy program, and Becky Antle. She is associate professor and university scholar and principal investigator of the federal Healthy Relationships Grant for at-risk adults and youth. Amanda Haupt is community educator and trainer with the Center for Women and Families here in Louisville. Bill Stanczykiewicz is president and CEO of the Indiana Youth Institute. And you're welcome to join us this hour at 814-TALK, 814-8255. And let's take a call now. Ted joins the program. Hello, Ted.
Hey, Julie, how are you?
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for calling.
Oh, yeah. You guys, this is such a great show, and the chasm between teenagers and their parents gets even, huger as time goes on. Mm-hmm. So I really love that you all are stressing for parents to talk to their teens. My situation was I was actually in a gay relationship, and I was not able to talk to my parents because I knew what their issues would be with that. So I was kind of curious about what the demographics are for gay teenagers, and is there more or less, or have you guys done any studies about that?
That's a great question. And Ted, thanks for calling because, we've been referring to boyfriends and girlfriends through the hour, and a listener would make the assumption that it's strictly heterosexual couples. Of course not. Same-sex teen relationships suffer from violence. Statistically, do we know? Same rate, different issues. Ted brings up a great one, saying, you say talk to my parents, but I wasn't able to talk to my parents.
Ted, this is an issue, this is Amanda, that I'm super passionate about. And when you look at studies, there's sort of a dearth of research out there. We're hoping always that there will be more. One of the things that we our standard line on it is to say that there are equal rates of abuse in heterosexual and homosexual relationships. So abuse occurs pretty much equally across those different types of relationship. But I think that you bring up a really important barrier for youth that might identify anywhere along the spectrum, that sometimes, especially in their formative relationship years where they're just charting out and understanding their sexuality and their sexual identity, it may be really tough to talk to mom or dad about that being in a homosexual relationship or considering that. So I think that that's a very real reality. One of the things that we tell youth to do all the time is to call our crisis line at the Center for Women and Families. And I know that there are some barriers to using us as well. I think that one of the things we encounter with male clients, regardless of their sexual identity, is the Center for Women and Families seems like an off-putting thing because of women, but we absolutely do serve men. And so our crisis line, 1-877-803-7577, is something that anyone can call and talk about what's going on. It's totally confidential, and our lines are always open.
All right, Ted, a great point. Thanks so much for calling. As we focus, too, on prevention, on education, we've talked about parents beginning those conversations very early, long before dating, and not just about dating, but certainly those lines of communication on a variety of subjects. But let's look a little bit at some structured programs. And Bill Stanczykiewicz, I want to go back to you. Tell us a little bit more about this state law and the role that educators are going to be playing in this or have to play in this.
Well, schools in the state of Indiana have now been charged with finding experts and best practices that they will then use to develop materials for the classroom so that teachers and school counselors can make students aware of teen dating violence, the signs to watch for, the situations to avoid, how to speak up and how to report these tragic incidents so when they do unfortunately occur. And the schools need to have that in place a year from now, by the summer of 2011. And, some people might say, well, what about their parents? And certainly parents do come first, as we said, so often throughout this program. But unfortunately, too many kids might not have that open relationship with their parents. So it's time to bring in other caring adults, and that's the focus of this law, to do just that. That said, what we've been telling our friends north of the river is, and we'll share with our neighbors south of the river, is don't wait for a year from now. Teen dating violence is real. Teen dating violence is now, and all of us can be part of this solution. Parents and all caring adults in the community can be part of this solution instead of just waiting for this institutional solution to come along a year from now.
And when we look at a structured program, and Bill says, they're going to have to getting experts together and develop a program, what works? And Becky, I want to go back to you because, we're probably all familiar with, again, the big threatening warning seminars. Don't let this happen to you. And it's usually always the worst case scenarios. And not that that's not important, but you were saying earlier, teens may not identify with it. It's like, well, he's not hitting me, so I guess I'm not being abused. So what works in a structured program?
Right. Well, and that it has been our point very much, that most of the programs to target teen dating violence have operated from a violence perspective, which is, description of violence as this power and control dynamic and this very extreme type. And those programs have shown moderate to little success in preventing teen dating violence long term. And so what we're studying, what we're investigating is a very different approach, and that is an approach that focuses on healthy relationships. And so we hold up the idea of a healthy relationship. We describe that because, like we said, what we encounter both among our youth and the adults that we serve, who are at-risk adults in the community, is that people don't have a definition of a healthy relationship. They don't know what the ingredients are for a healthy relationship. And so we describe that. We do also describe the warning signs, communication, and other signs of abuse that would let them know that their relationship that they're currently in is not one that should continue. Mm-hmm. And then we teach them healthy relationship skills. And I think that's another key ingredient. So one key ingredient is a health perspective, holding up and describing and teaching them about what's good and what's healthy. A second key ingredient is the skills base, which is part of the curriculum that we use. For our adults, we use a curriculum called Within My Reach. For our youth, we use a curriculum called Love Notes. Both of those are derivatives of a larger relationship education program called PrEP, the Prevention and Relationship Enhancement Program, and that is the most evidence-supported relationship education program in the country. It has about 25 years of research. It's a best practice through national organizations and the federal government. And so we're using these curricula that are founded in those best practices. So that second component, as I said, is a skills base. And so we teach them in a very hands-on, interactive way healthy communication and conflict resolution skills and relationship decision-making skills. Here are some ways that you form healthy relationships. Here are some ways you end unhealthy relationships. And so it's very skills-based, and we actually measure and observe their skills to make sure they're mastering them. And so I think those are some of the key ingredients of effective programs. One, that we operate from a health perspective, particularly with teens, instead of coming at them with a model of dating violence that may or may not fit.
Right.
And then secondly, that we teach them concrete skills for the future.
Yeah, I'd like to underscore that, as Becky was saying, our program is based on that insight or knowledge is not enough. You need to know what to do about it. So it's the knowledge plus skills is what makes a difference for a lot of our participants. Also, our program is crouched under a healthy relationship. If you are a victim of relationship violence or abuse, you're less likely to attend a program with that title. But if it's crouched under healthy relationships or relationship skills, we cast a broader net and highlight those people that might be suffering from some of these issues but might not know how to get help or feel that it's safe to get help.
Is there a value, and is there a model for peer-to-peer programs? Because, the statistic when we talk about 1/3 of high school students, yes, I've either experienced violence or I have been aware of it in a friend's relationship. But we know teens are big on holding confidences. They don't want to betray a friend or tattle to the parents. So how do you, if the person being victimized by violence is unable for whatever reason to get out of that or to get help, then how do friends help friends? How do you construct a model for that?
This is one of the big approaches that we're using at the Center for Women and Families. We're actually in the process, and I'm sort of charged with spearheading the effort in Louisville to pilot a new prevention program called Green Dot. Like a lot of primary prevention programs, the program's rooted in the public health model, so there's a lot of good evidence behind it. And it really sort of hinges on the role of the bystander. I mean, I think that Becky was exactly right, and your comments were correct, that kids don't want to be approached with, there's this scary thing, watch out. I think that a universal human truth is that none of us think of ourselves as victims or perpetrators or potential victims or potential perpetrators. That's just not a way that we want to think of ourselves. But all of us will be at some point in our lives in that role of the bystander, of somebody who is a friend of someone, who maybe see something happen in their workplace, maybe see something happen out in public. And so Green Dot really is, at its fundamental level, all about each one of us finding our own way into doing prevention, finding our own little thing that we can do to really stop this from happening. One of the big efforts that it does is to give kiddos knowledge from a bystander perspective of what to look out for. So what are those concrete warning signs? If you've got a friend, what are you going to see if they're in an abusive relationship? How are you going to know? And then also sort of just acknowledging that there are plenty of reasons why all of us don't intervene. We're not flawed or messed up because we don't always step in and say something. Most of the time we just don't have good skills. We don't know how to do it. We don't know the appropriate way to go about that. So the last piece of Green Dot really is to give youth skills, both to intervene in high-risk situations when it's apparent that something bad is happening, but also just to sort of endorse nonviolence in their daily life, let people know that kind of behavior is not going to pass by them unnoticed. So it's a lot about giving kids intervention skills and really teaching them to engage in the conversation around this, a good conversation with their friends, with the idea that if they're having dialogue, if they have these skills, they're going to be really effective at preventing violence.
And this sort of, to take it a step up, this community at large, talking about a community level approach to tackling this. Bill Stanczykiewicz, just maybe a couple thoughts on that too. We can talk about working with individuals, we can talk about peer-to-peer, but what about creating a shift really in the community, a zero tolerance? What might be some strategies there? Is there something happening in Indiana?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's anything happening in Indiana, but that also, and it's been alluded to and also maybe said explicitly here, that it's difficult because nobody wants to go out into the public square and, boast and brag that they've been victimized, by dating violence in their relationship. So what we need to do instead is just, thank you for a program like this to continue to bring attention to this so that people can be emboldened, especially teenagers, with those hormones, with those chemicals ranging along, not knowing what normal is, not knowing what appropriate is, and then having all those teen feelings, confusing them even further, to get the word out and let them know. And I did want to hit a little harder on what parents can do. I mean, there are some really basic things. We mentioned earlier modeling, effective and healthy behaviors for your kids in terms of relationships. Knowing who your child is dating, knowing the details of the date, where they're going, what the expectation is for return time home, letting your child know if you're ever in an uncomfortable situation, call me, text me, I will pick you up anytime, anywhere. So, just again, having that conversation, and if they roll the eyes and exhale, that's okay. They're soaking it in, and if things do get tough, they will remember that you offered to help. That's
a great point. And Becky, maybe just to put a coda on that, too. I think it's great when Bill says, they'll roll the eyes, but it's important for them to know that you care. I mean, it sounds very simple, but
right,
that's the core truth.
Right. As Bill said earlier, despite what they may say when their friends are around, parents are still the single greatest influence on their lives when you ask them, apart from their parents and their friends. Hearing the answer to that's been found time and time again. And so you may not think you're getting through, but you really are, and they really value your opinion, and they value the example that you set and the offers of help. Regardless of the circumstances, it's that unconditional love that regardless of the situation that you find yourself in, I'll be there for you.
All right. Well, a lot of great information during this program, not only from your organizations, but Bernadette had called. She couldn't stay with us. Wants folks to know Planned Parenthood of Kentucky also has programs for both parents and teens. You can reach them 584-2471. But I want to thank our callers, and I want to thank our guests here in the studio from the U of L Kent School of Social Work, Eli Karam and Becky Antle. Thank you very much for being with us. Amanda Haupt with the Center for Women and Families. Amanda, thanks to you. And Bill Stanczykiewicz. He is president and CEO of the Indiana Youth Institute. Again, thanks for your information and your time.
Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. For more information about today's program, you go to WFPL.org and click on State of Affairs. You can email us from there. You can follow us on Twitter at SOA Talk, and on Facebook. You can call us at 502-814-6500. State of Affairs is produced by Louisville Public Media with support from the University of Louisville. Robin Fisher is our producer. Our assistant is Laura Ellis. I'm Julie Credence. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll